Okay, so in terms of the content, everyone, the webinar will start with a brief introduction. The focus will then shift to farm pesticide stores. Under this section, local authority approval, site criteria, construction criteria, security, separation and segregation, working area, warning notices, symbolic and directional safety signs, product labels, the responsible person, record keeping, fire protection, spill management, first aid, and lastly, emergency planning will be thoroughly covered. The following section will focus on commercial depots at the distributor agent level, which takes into account more legislation. The National Environmental Management Act, Act number 107 of 1998, and the Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations is one such example that will be covered under this section, where the information that will be communicated will be relevant to commercial pesticide depots and warehouses. In order not to bore anyone, and given that a lot of the details under the heading to be covered for farm stores will be applicable to depots, only key additional information will be highlighted as relevant. This will be the same for the section focusing on commercial pesticide warehouses, where only key information in addition to what will be covered for commercial pesticide depots will again be communicated as relevant. Finally, the best practices for the storage of home and garden pesticides at the household level will be the final section I cover for today. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into it. Okay, so it is no secret to everyone in attendance today that pesticides are widely used and are important tools in agricultural production in South Africa. For many producers, economically sustainable agriculture is not possible without the use of pesticides that are registered in terms of the Fertilizers, Farm Feeds, Agricultural Remedies and Stock Remedies Act, Act number 36 of 1947, of which includes herbicides, miticides, insecticides, nematicides, and fungicides. Safety precautions must be taken during all steps of pesticide use, including handling, mixing, loading, and application. The pesticide label is the law and provides essential safety and product use information that must be followed. The proper storage of pesticides, whether in a warehouse, depot, farm, store, or home, is equally as important as the application process to not only protect human and animal health, but also to save the environment from soil and water contamination. Section 4 of the Bill of Rights within the Constitution of South Africa determines that every person has the right to an environment which is not harmful to their health or well-being, and that the environment is conserved for current and future generations. Depending on your operation and the types and quantities of pesticide stores, there will be different storage requirements. Now, the handling, storage, and disposal of pesticides at the business and farm level is covered in the South African National Standards, SANS 10206, published by the South African Bureau of Standards, SABS. This SANS document is referenced in the National Act, Act number 61 of 2003, and deals with all relevant legal requirements in a reader-friendly context. The 2020 edition of SANS 10206 can be purchased online via www.sabs.co.za. CropLife South Africa encourages businesses dealing with pesticides and farmers to always have in their possession the latest copy of SANS 10206. This SANS code will enable businesses and farmers to comply with all legal requirements pertaining to the storage of pesticides. As I noted at the start, today's webinar will provide guidelines to ensure pesticides are correctly stored in warehouses, depots, farm stores, and homes. Oopsie. Okay, so let's start with storage at the farm level and then work our way to commercial depot and warehouse storage facilities. Okay, so now when a new farm store is being built, plans must be submitted to the relevant local authority. An occupancy certificate to certify that the structure complies with the National Building Regulations and Building Standards Act, Act number 103 of 1977, will be issued after the necessary inspection by the local fire authority, health, sewerage, building inspectorates, and so forth. Remember that every region in South Africa falls under a particular municipality. A concerted effort has to be made to get into contact with the relevant municipality, regardless of distance or functionality, and keep all such records safely filed, for example, email communications, meetings, and so forth, to show that attempts have been made. Where no communication or assistance is received from the local authority, then report this to the relevant provincial Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, more commonly known as COCTA, in order to find a solution. Remember very clearly that without any proof to show that the attempts made, it will just be your word against the municipality. The issue of existing pesticide farm stores with no valid occupancy certificate can be rectified by submitting a sketch plan of the store to the local authority in order to schedule an inspection so that an occupancy certificate can be obtained. But note that this will depend largely on the level of compliance in relation to the aspects that I will now cover going forward. Okay, so the site location criteria for farmers to take note of when deciding to erect pesticide stores are as follows. Electricity and water must be available. Power supply should be reliable with good water flow. The store must be situated above the 50-year flood line, but preferably above the 100-year flood line. Farm stores must be situated away more than 500 meters from rivers, dams, boreholes, and any areas likely to be flooded. The possible pollution risk from spilled chemicals has to be taken into account when the location of the store is being considered. The direction of water flow, surface drainage must be taken into account in case of fire or flooding, because crops, pastures, and water sources could be contaminated. The pesticide store must be at least 10 meters away from any dwelling or livestock buildings. Farm pesticide stores should preferably be standalone. However, if this is not feasible and if the store is part of a larger complex or other stores, it must be totally sealed off with a firewall. I will touch more on this when we get to and segregation. The farm pesticide store must be in a location where it would not be exposed to falling trees and felled fires. Combustible vegetation within 50 meters of the building should be cleared, as it could pose a fire hazard. Farm stores should be easily accessible for delivery, dispatch, and more importantly, in the case of fire, then would be able to approach the building from all sides, has to also be taken into consideration. Finally, farm stores have to be situated in a manner that allows the store to be supervised at all times. Now let's move on to construction criteria. Okay, so let's start with the floor. Now the floor of a farm pesticide store must be of smooth concrete and must not be slippery even when wet. It must be impenetrable to spilled chemicals and should have watertight wall-to-floor cracked, integrating or rough concrete floors, as well as soil, wood, bitumen, PVC, or linoleum floors are not acceptable in this instance. Farm store designs must also take into consideration spillage containment. Spillage containment in the form of a surrounding sill, curb, or bund wall is non-negotiable. Generally, when we talk spillage containment, we talk bunding in South Africa, which refers to a ridge or retention wall. In particular, the perimeter of the store floor must be bunded to at least a height of 200 millimeters high and 110 millimeters wide, with the wall-to-floor joints being watertight and also able to contain 110% of the total volume of pesticide stored. Now, where vehicle or forklift access is required, ramps will have to be inclined to a gradient of at least 1 in 10 to allow for smooth entry into the storage area. Farmers need to understand that bunding is crucial to contain spills of firefighting water that could cause damage to the environment and to prevent water, for example, flood runoff from entering the store. In the event of a fire, runoff water cannot leave the site. This is achieved through the construction of a dike ahead of a spill for later disposal, and that must be done in accordance with the National Environmental Management Waste Act number 59 of 2008. The walls must be made from brick and concrete or fireproof steel. Farm store frames must be made from concrete or steel. Where steel frames are used, these must be fire protected to provide the required stability. Under no circumstances whatsoever may aluminium be used. Why no aluminium now? Well, the answer is really simple, guys. Aluminium warps at low temperatures and can auto-combust at around 700 degrees Celsius, leaving the frame bent or twisted and, well, ultimately out of shape. Now, the roof of a farm store must be leak-free and insulated with non-combustible material to maintain the temperature in the store at reasonable levels. Roof vents are installed only to allow hot air to escape during the summer months. While wooden doors can be utilized, steel doors are highly recommended. Further, doors must have security gates to reduce the risk of forced entry, and doors must be raised 200 millimeters to accommodate bunding as well. For wooden doors, security gates are absolutely vital. Now, with regard to exit doors, these must open to the outside and have locking devices as approved by the local fire authority. In addition, exit doors must at all times be capable of being opened easily from the inside without the use of a key. This is particularly important during an emergency which requires evacuation. Window frames are manufactured of steel, fitted with 8 millimeter reinforced wire glass and panels of a maximum size of 450 millimeters by 450 millimeters. Always remember that windows are installed to only allow enough daylight into the store so that product labels can be read. All windows in a farm pesticide store must not be capable of opening. Regarding ventilation, this may be achieved through mechanical means by installing extractive fans or whirlybirds, as well as through natural methods such as the installation of non-combustible air bricks. Keep in mind that enough extraction devices need to be installed to ensure constant fresh airflow and air quality. Where shelves and racks are used, these have to be impervious and chemically resistant to the stored chemicals. Large bags, boxes, and drums may be stored on pallets. Combustible trays on hardwood shelves may be used. Farm pesticide stores will require adequate protection against lightning, and in areas where flammable substances are stored, appropriate measures will need to be taken to prevent the accumulation of electrostatic charges or discharge electrostatic charges under controlled circumstances. Finally, when it comes to electrical equipment and fittings, these must be installed and certified by a qualified electrician. Light fittings must be flame-proof where only fluorescent or LED is to be used, with no tungsten bulbs or mercury fluorescent bulbs allowed. Ensure that all electrical equipment in all areas of the store are in good working condition and used for the stipulated purpose. Right. Now, when it comes to security, it is crucial that only the farmer and the employee appointed by the farmer responsible for the farm store have access to the keys and are allowed into the store. The farm pesticide store will need to be secured against entry of unauthorized persons, stray animals, and vermin by a wall or fence at least 1.8 meters high around the site with a lockable gate. The installation of security lighting directed at the fence and not at the site contents is recommended. The importance of security measures for pesticide stores cannot be overstated. In most cases, pesticides stolen from farm stores are used to commit nefarious deeds with very serious consequences. Therefore, the installation of an alarm system linked to an armed response unit is strongly advised. Now, different types of pesticides segregate and solid formulations separate. Liquid pesticides must be stored on the lower shelves or racks and not above powder and granular formulations. This is to provide for minimum damage in the event of an accidental leakage of liquid during storage. Pesticides in fiberboard boxes, paper bags, and fiberboard drums are to be placed on pallets and not stacked against a wall. The reason is simple. Cement floors tend to sweat, which can damage products. In addition, herbicides are not to be stored above insecticides or fungicides. If herbicides are stored on top and spill into insecticides and fungicides, crop damage is guaranteed where crops are not herbicide tolerant. All highly hazardous products classified as 6.1 toxic according to UN number must be locked in a separate cage in the store marked danger. This is something that farmers can query with their crop advisors, agents upon product sales. Alternatively, farmers can take the proactive approach and lock up all products with the GHS signal word danger, and not forgetting products that still have the older WHO red bands. Farmers can simply put a wired up fence, up a wired up fence in the pesticide store with a wire gate that is locked at all times in this instance. Given that cement floors tend to sweat, solid powder and granular pesticides must be placed on pallets where stacking is not against the wall. And I think I touched on that earlier as well. Plastic and metal drums of 20 liters or more must not be stacked to a height of more than 2 tiers high. To be clear now, a farm pesticide store is used for the storage of pesticides only, and if relevant, packaging material and equipment used for the application of pesticides and nothing else. Store the following in a farm pesticide store. Firstly, animal feeds or solid inorganic fertilizers. Why? Because these may absorb the pesticide fumes, thereby compromising the integrity of those products. Now, a separate facility is not required. As I mentioned earlier, if the pesticide store is part of a larger complex or other stores, it must be totally sealed off with the firewall so that there is no free movement of air between the pesticide store and the rest of the building. Now, before I move on from fertilizers, the question some may have is, what about liquid fertilizers packaged in plastic containers? Do these also have to be separated from pesticides? The short answer is no. Whether organic or inorganic liquid fertilizers, given the formulation and the fact that it is packaged in plastic containers, such products will not absorb pesticide fumes, and therefore the integrity of such products will not be compromised. Secondly, and very important, flammable liquid pesticides must be stored in a flammable store. Farmers will need to store pesticides in a separate enclosure section of the pesticide store that is sealed off by a firewall if there is no separate room available. The firewall is very necessary given the hazard presented here. This area needs to be clearly marked with the flammable liquid hazard class diamond as well as the applicable symbolic safety signs, which I will touch on later as well. Fire equipment, again, which I will touch on later, must also be made available in this area. This area must be ventilated to the open air in such a manner that vapor cannot accumulate inside. Also remember that this section or enclosure must also be bonded. Now, when it comes to flammable solid pesticide formulations, in our opinion, there's no reason why farmers cannot store flammable liquid and solid pesticides in the same flammable store where liquids and solids are separated by an airspace of at least 3 meters. Remember to also include the flammable solid hazard class diamond with the flammable liquid hazard class diamond where this is the case. Finally, do not store any fuels or hydrocarbon lubricants where pesticides are stored. Our advice here is that farmers should look at obtaining a 3-meter shipping container with adequate ventilation in the form of whirlybirds, and not forgetting fire protection as well for this purpose. Okay. A separate bonded working area must be available with ample facilities for weighing, measuring, and mixing of pesticides. Suitable and adequate measuring equipment must be provided, as well as personal decontamination facilities in the form of a wash basin with running water and an eye wash bottle. A safety shower facility with soap and a clean towel should be made available in or near the working area so that spray operators can wash after spraying, and also in the case of accidental contamination when spillage occurs. Ensure that these facilities are located in a manner so as to avoid contamination by pesticides. Now, when running water is not available, each spray operator must be provided with separate, clearly marked containers for washing of the body and of protective clothing and equipment. Remember that contaminated washing water must not be disposed of into any water source, including rivers, groundwater sources, and sewage systems. Okay, moving on to warning notices. The warning: storage of dangerous goods, unauthorized entry prohibited, as you see there, or similar, in red letters with height of 75 millimeters against a white background in English and one other language indigenous to the region, must be displayed preferably on walls at each entrance to the store. Further, the warning: storage of dangerous goods, unauthorized entry prohibited, or similar, in red letters with height of 75 millimeters against white background in English or other language indigenous to the region, must also be placed on the fence surrounding the storage area at all entry points. Where only one hazard class is stored, for example, pesticides belonging to class 6.1 toxic, the relevant 250 millimeter by 250 millimeter class hazard class diamond is displayed at each entrance. Where more than one hazard class is stored, which will be the case in most instances, a 250 millimeter by 250 millimeter mixed load diamond is displayed at each entrance. Now, unlike flammables, in the case of corrosive pesticides belonging to class 8, do not have to be stored in a sealed off section enclosure of the pesticide store from the other classes, provided such products are separated by an airspace of at least 3 meters and no less than 1 meter from a wall where the corrosive hazard class diamond can be clearly displayed. Employees must also receive training in the meaning of these warning notices. Now, before I move on to symbolic and directional safety signs, and to be clear, in order to determine which pesticide falls into which hazard class when it comes to storage and commercial transportation, one must refer to the proper shipping name, which is the UN number. The UN number is linked to the hazard class of the pesticide product. This can be achieved by referring to section 14 of the safety data sheet for a pesticide product. Alternatively, farmers can seek the services of an advisor or consultant. Okay, now when it comes to safety signs, for example, no smoking, no eating or drinking, no open flames, no fires, and no fires. These should be displayed at the entrance and inside the store, as well as the section of the store where flammable pesticides are stored. Signs must be at least 290 millimeters by 290 millimeters in size. Symbolic safety signs have to be in place to highlight the positions and type of fire-related equipment. For example, extinguishers, hose reels, hydrants, mains, water supplies, alarm switches, and the first aid kit station, as well as to highlight areas where protective clothing is required. Signs must again be 290 millimeters by 290 millimeters in size. Directional safety signs are also very important to highlight escape routes and emergency exits. All symbolic safety signs must be relevant and appropriate, clearly visible, not ambiguous, and not subject to damage during normal operations. Again, as with the warning notices, employees must be trained in the meaning of symbolic and directional safety signs. Finally, before moving on, all such signage must be SABS approved. It is therefore important that farmers purchase their photoluminescent signage with a reputable company and ensure they are installed or placed at the correct location, in close proximity to fire equipment and visible enough to employees or visitors. Okay. Now, when it comes to product labels, the advice to farmers could not be clearer. Only pesticides registered under the Fertilizers, Farm Feeds, Agricultural Remedies and Stock Remedies Act, Act number 36 of 1947, may be stored where no unregistered pesticides may be in the possession of any person on the farm. The sale, acquisition, use, and disposal of a pesticide other than in a container with the label as approved by the Registrar of Act 36 is only permitted when the pesticide is used for experimental trials and prior approval is obtained from the registrar. Now, very important, farmers would know about the new about the new GHS format pesticide labels, given the awareness, information and training sessions already undertaken and continuing to be undertaken by the entire industry, not just CropLife South Africa. It remains crucial that employees working with handling or spraying pesticides are trained in the meaning of the GHS hazard pictograms and can interpret the instructions on product labels. The four key elements with regards to GHS GHS labels and employee training are the GHS hazard pictograms, signal words, hazard statements, and precautionary statements. So in short, GHS pictograms are used to immediately alert the user handler to the hazards of the product that they may be exposed to. The signal word is an integral part of the GHS label, where one of two words are used to emphasize the pesticide's hazards by indicating the relative level of severity of the hazard. Where a user or a handler sees the signal word danger on a GHS pesticide label, this means that the product presents severe hazards, whereas a product with the signal word warning will present less severe hazards. The hazard statements describe the nature and severity of a chemical hazard, while the precautionary statements help to explain how to handle a hazardous substances or a mixture of hazardous substances, as well as which precautions to take to prevent adverse effects resulting from such hazards. There are generally four types of precautionary statements associated with prevention, response, storage, and disposal. Now, the responsible person for a farm pesticide store is the farmer. However, as I mentioned when we covered security, the farmer may appoint an employee who is then responsible for managing the store. This appointed employee must have received training in managing a farm pesticide store, and most importantly, understands the implications of careless, irresponsible handling. Training records must be safely filed by the farmer should this be requested by inspectors. The duties for the appointed employee in this regard should be as follows. Firstly, and again to reiterate, strict access control must be maintained with the visitor register, visitor cards, and regular security checks. Now, it is also crucial that anyone entering the store to handle pesticides are wearing the appropriate PPE correctly. Farmers are mandated under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, Act number 85 of 1993, to provide any employee handling pesticides with the relevant personal protective clothing and equipment. Where employees blatantly refuse to use PPE in this regard, this must be reported to the farmer for disciplinary action. A register must be kept whenever personal protective clothing and equipment is issued, and the employees receiving the clothing and equipment must sign the register as well. It is also highly advisable that the responsible person has an Agri-Intel subscription to check whether the pesticides stored are indeed registered for the intended use. Upon a delivery vehicle arriving with the pesticide consignment and before offloading, the responsible person must ensure that the vehicle is fit for purpose. And where this is not the case, the consignment should not be accepted. Containers must be inspected on receipt to ensure that the correct products have been delivered. Pesticides in packages and containers that are not clearly and properly labeled must not be accepted or used. It is also important to ensure that no leaking containers are accepted. It is extremely crucial that the first in, first out principle is maintained when managing pesticide stock to ensure that the oldest pesticide product, not expired of course, for a certain application is used first. This will prevent any obsolete pesticide stocks from building up in the store. There will be no added burden of having to safeguard obsolete pesticide stocks, and probably the most important, money will not be wasted on the services of a compliant hazmat service provider in order to have obsolete pesticide stocks thermally destroyed. No vehicles or forklifts are allowed to be parked inside the store. Recreational sports facilities are to be erected in the pesticide store. Smoking, eating, or drinking inside a pesticide store must be forbidden. These actions are a sure way for pesticide residues to enter the body, given because cigarettes, food, and drink are handled with contaminated hands. This also puts into context the importance of employees being trained in the meaning of symbolic safety signs. Now, when there are no employees in the store, remember that all electrical and things, except in the case of a ventilation system, must be switched off. Now, when it comes to record keeping, it is important for the appointed responsible employee to maintain the following for farm stores: written or electronic records for each pesticide product received, dispatched, and used. It is recommended that on receipt of a pesticide consignment from a supplier, at least the following information be recorded: product name, batch number, name and address of supplier, quantity and date of receipt, name of the responsible person who received delivery, and purpose. Records are to be kept for all pesticide products used and balance of products in the store. Finally, records must be kept in a safe place away from the storage area and available for inspection by national, provincial, or local authorities as applicable. Right, now when it comes to fire protection, this is also critically important. Portable fire extinguishers of minimum 9 kg capacity for the dry chemical and foam type, or 9 liter for the carbon dioxide type, needs to be provided within the store. There should be at least one extinguisher to every 100 meters to every 100 meters squared, unless more is deemed necessary by the local fire authority upon inspection. Fire extinguishers will have to be inspected and maintained annually by a registered person. A fire hose connected to a water supply should be mounted outside the store, and it is recommended that an overhead automated sprinkler system be installed in a store with the capacity of 9 meters or larger. Again, just to reiterate the fact that at least one fire extinguisher to 100 meters squared must be provided as deemed necessary by the local authority. Okay, when it comes to pesticide spillages, Gerard has covered and will continue to cover this in detail during his responsible use webinars. In short, ensure that a spill management kit is available, visible, and easily accessible in the storage area. This comprises of a 210-liter open-head plastic drum or wheelie bin for hazardous waste, plastic for hazardous waste, plastic. Just give me a second, guys. Plastic or stainless steel spade, small plastic scoop, and a hand broom. Plastic broom with plastic bristles, absorbent materials in the form of Arabic gum, vermiculite, absorbent brooms, any commercial brands. And then, yeah, also importantly, the 1 meter by 1 meter and 30 centimeter by 45 centimeter 40 micron LD plastic bags, as well as duct tape are to be covered in the kit. From the spill cleanup protocol in place where workers clearly understand the process to be followed in the event of a spillage and to avoid any confusion in such an event as well. Now, call the Griffin Poison Information Center emergency number on your screen if you need any special advice. Remember that once a spill site is decontaminated and the hazardous material safeguarded, a hazmat service provider will be contacted if there is no such contract already in place to remove such material for disposal, which involves thermal destruction. Farmers are encouraged to visit the CropLife South Africa website and click on container management on the web. On that page, farmers will find the contact details of suitable and compliant hazmat service providers. Okay, in terms of first aid, the first aid kit station must be easily accessible again with no obstructions against the wall above the wash basin. The contents of the first aid kit must be kept up to date with sufficient stock of material for treating general injuries. Sections of the first aid kit usage register, injury on duty, commonly referred to by many as IOD forms, and emergency information is available and must be carried out by the assigned first aider. At least one employee who handles and applies pesticides needs to be trained in basic first aid and be in possession of a valid first aid certificate issued by an organization approved for this purpose, such as NOSA, for example. Now, the safety data sheets of the pesticide stores must be readily available at a central location in the store for reference to the actions to be taken in the event of an exposure. When an STS has been misplaced, lost, or damaged for a product, the STS for the product can be downloaded via the Agri-Intel database. If any symptom of illness or discomfort is experienced, for example, a headache, dizziness, vomiting, diarrhea, tightness of the chest, or if abnormal behavior becomes apparent after a pesticide has been handled, an occupational healthcare practitioner must be immediately consulted, or a poison information center must be consulted for advice when a healthcare practitioner is not immediately available. Okay, in terms of emergency planning, note the following. Emergency telephone numbers of the responsible employee and owner, a poison information center, occupational healthcare practitioner, hospital, South African Police Service, SAPS, fire brigade, and ambulance service must be clearly displayed at the entrance, preferably as part of the warning notices and inside the store as well. The responsible employee for the store must have immediate access to a phone in case of an emergency and must be familiar with the emergency procedure, which clearly outlines actions to be taken in an emergency. This procedure must be available at an easily accessible position in the store. It is recommended that farmers have a disaster management plan in place for large pesticide stores in the event of a major spill or fire incident. Finally, here are some extra notes that farmers should keep in mind. Firstly, all activities to be conducted in the store, such as cutting, welding, and so forth, formal procedure needs to be established for the handover of responsibilities from the responsible employee to the outside contractor undertaking the work. Now, such activities must only be conducted by certified professional contractors. In terms of the formal handover, the procedure must aim to ensure the safety of the contractor by considering health and physical hazards in order to provide a working environment where the task can be efficiently completed while not compromising operations, of course. Lastly, while I have commented on the disposal of hazardous waste and obsolete pesticide stocks, I have not yet done so for empty pesticide containers. Do not allow uncleaned, hazardous, empty pesticide containers to build up on farms. According to the National Environmental Management Waste Act, Act number 59 of 2008, farmers are not allowed to burn, bury, reuse, sell, or donate empty pesticide containers. The only option available, therefore, is recycling. These containers must be cleaned by a method that renders the containers nominally empty, meaning non-hazardous. This involves triple rinsing to remove residues and puncturing to render the container useless. Farmers are encouraged to refer to the CropLife South Africa cleaning guidelines available to farmers on our container management webpage. Once containers have been triple rinsed and punctured, farmers must then access our list of certified recyclers on our website and make contact with the certified recycler in the area to arrange for disposal of the triple rinsed, punctured empty pesticide containers at the recycler site. As mentioned, empty pesticide containers cleaned according to our triple rinsing guideline are not deemed hazardous and may be transported by farmers for disposal at the site of a CropLife South Africa certified recycler without any further legal liability. Farmers must also insist on being issued with a certificate proving adequate and lawful disposal from the certified recycler. that empty pesticide containers which have not been adequately cleaned will not be accepted by our recyclers because such containers are considered notionally empty, meaning farmers should keep all certificates of disposal safely filed to prove compliance, which may be required by auditors or certification agencies such as Global Gap for access to international markets. Finally, note that while I have focused on empty containers, there are various forms of pesticide packaging to consider, but not to worry, we have scientifically proven cleaning guidelines for all types of pesticide packaging available on our website. Now, before I move on, everyone, I'm just going to quickly grab a sip of water. Okay, now just in terms of the final word on the section, Africa encourages farmers to use the various informative resources made available by the association, as well as SANS 10206 to compile comprehensive checklists in order to conduct self-audits. This is always a great way to understand what's in place, what's not, and where immediate attention may be required. A detailed plan, concerted effort to address shortcomings while setting practical targets will serve farmers well in the long term. Okay, right on. Let's move on to commercial storage facilities at the business level. We will now start with depots at the distributor and agent level. Now, as all of you would know, when it comes to commercial pesticide depots, the requirements become more demanding compared to that of a pesticide store at the farm level. More regulations and legislations have to be accounted for. One such, and probably the most important, is the National Environmental Management Act, Act number 107 of 1998, better known as NEMA, and the regulations pertaining to the environmental impact assessments. Firstly, it is important for anyone who owns or rents or aims to own, construct, develop, or rent a commercial pesticide storage facility, such as a warehouse or depot, to grasp why it is crucial to have a thorough understanding of the environmental impact assessment regulations and listing notices. An EIA in South Africa, simply put, is conducted when a new development or activity is proposed. It is a tool used by the competent authority as defined in NEMA to assess significant effects of a project or development proposal on the environment. In South Africa, this means that an EIA process provides a mean for giving effect to the environmental right that is enshrined in Section 24 of the Constitution. This section ensures that ecologically sustainable development is secured while promoting justifiable and social development. Everyone listening in today must note that while the objective is to strive for the most suitable environmental option, there are limitations to what is feasible and practical when considering time, cost, and technology. In essence, an EIA serves to allow for a process that determines the best option, promotes sustainable development through efficient management of social, environmental, and economic impacts in order to ensure valued environmental resources are not compromised, human health is protected, and social as well as economic aspects of a proposed development is improved. Now, by assessing the identification of alternatives, a report pertaining to need and desirability, as well as the sustainability of the development, allows the competent authority to conclude an informed decision in order to issue an environmental authorization with or without conditions, or refuse environmental authorization. Okay. Now, there are two categories of prescribed EIA processes. A basic assessment would involve small-scale activities, shorter processes, projects that are not complicated, and impacts that can be easily controlled. A scoping and environmental impact report, known as an EIR or full EIA, involves high-scale activities, longer processes, projects that are complex and sensitive, as well as impacts deemed significant. The basic assessment process would take 197 days, but where a report needs to be corrected and redistributed, then one can expect up to 247 days, whereas an scoping and EIR process takes around 300 days. But again, where a report requires correction and redistribution, then one can expect up to 350 days. Now, an EIA is a project-based procedure with several distinct phases, namely screening, scoping, specialist assessments, for example, fauna, flora, archaeology, noise, flickering, fire, explosion, flooding, and so forth. Integration and assessment, public participation, which happens throughout the EIA process, competent authority review and decision making, implementation of the EIA decision, and finally, monitoring. If notices which is an EIA, it is firstly important between listed activities and specified activities. Now, listed activities are listed everywhere in South Africa unless an exclusion applies, whereas specified activities are specified only in identified sensitive geographical areas. In the case of specified activities, the relevant provincial member of the Executive Council, or MEC, responsible for environmental management, with the concurrence of the Minister, of course, may identify such activities that may commence without obtaining environmental authorization from the competent authority. Now, how is dangerous goods defined in listing notices 1, 2, and 3? Dangerous goods in this context means goods containing any of the substances as contemplated in the South African National Standard 10234A of 2008, titled List of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals in Accordance with the Globally Harmonized Systems, or commonly known as the GHS. Alternatively, Table C1 of SANS 10231, titled Transport of Dangerous Goods by Road Operational Requirements, may also be referred to for this purpose. Note that dangerous goods as defined does not have the same meaning as hazardous substances, hazardous chemicals, hazardous chemical agents, or hazardous waste, although all of these are likely to be dangerous goods. Fair to say that indeed at this stage, the definition of dangerous goods is at best nebulous. With that said, note that Annex A, alphabetical list of chemicals, contained in SANS 10234A of 2008, was not included in the updated 2019 version. A legal opinion obtained by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment has noted that dangerous goods activities as identified in the 3 listing notices are valid, and SANS 10234A of 2008 must still be referred to for the purposes of the EIA regulations. The status quo is therefore retained. Now, for anyone who has worked with these SANS codes and regulations will agree that any registered pesticide product with the UN number meets the definition of dangerous goods in this context of the listing notices. Okay, but now it becomes crucial to take into account the definition of container. Pesticides with identified UN numbers must be packaged in the approved pesticide container. To be clear, everyone, if the substance is, for example, stored in polypropylene plastic or paper bags, which is placed on open shelves, pallets, or stacked on the floor, the listed or specified activities will not be triggered based on current regulations. With that said, keep in mind that the term container is under revision. Now, during an extraordinary distribution forum meeting held in 2023 for CropLife SA members, the DEF-E environmental specialists highlighted the activity under listing notices 1 to 3 relevant to commercial pesticide storage facilities. For listing notice 1, listed activity 14 under this listing notice is relevant when it comes to the storage of dangerous goods in this context. Under this listing notice, and as can be seen, if the volume of dangerous goods, in this case pesticides with UN numbers stored in containers, is 80 cubic meters or more, but not exceeding 500 cubic meters, a basic EIA will be required. For listing notice 2, listed activity 4 under this listing notice is relevant when it comes to the storage of dangerous goods in this context again. Under this listing notice, if the volume of pesticides with UN numbers stored in containers is more than 500 cubic meters, a full EIA will be mandatory. Finally, for listing notice 3, specified activity 10 is relevant when it comes to the storage of dangerous goods. Now here, it is firstly important to determine whether the site of the commercial pesticide storage facility falls within a specified sensitive geographical area. This will be specific for each province. To identify the specified sensitive geographical areas for each province under this listing notice, refer to Appendix 1 of the Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations, listing notice 3 of 2014, published under NEMA. Where the volume of pesticides with UN numbers stored in containers is 30 cubic meters or more within a specified sensitive geographical zone, for example, on the border of a nature reserve, then an EIA will be required. And importantly, note that in such zones, storage of dangerous goods must not exceed 80 cubic meters. Now, for anyone looking to establish a commercial pesticide storage facility, whether a depot or warehouse, consider the following. The most important step at the very start prior to construction must be to determine whether environmental authorization will be required for the identified site. Where an EIA is deemed necessary, determine whether this will entail a basic or full assessment. Do not plan to erect pesticide storage facilities in specified sensitive geographical zones under listing notice 3 as applicable to each province. Be informed on which geographical areas have been identified for each province by referring to Appendix 1 as highlighted on the previous slide. It makes sense to consider industrial zones when it comes to commercial pesticide storage, particularly in light of the fact that storage of dangerous goods in listed sensitive geographical zones cannot exceed 80 cubic meters. Where a storage facility is planned in a specified sensitive geographical area, that will trigger an EIA under listing notice 3, and if there are no other options available, then the provincial environmental management authorities must be notified prior to any work or assessments being undertaken. Okay, now that's all good and well for someone looking to establish a commercial pesticide storage facility. But what about someone who has an established facility and was not aware of the environmental impact assessment regulations in terms of the listing notices? Well, then take note of the following. Firstly, identify which pesticides stored meet the definition of dangerous goods. Then determine the combined capacity of the identified pesticides. Where listing notice 1 is triggered, and if the combined capacity cannot be reduced to below 80 cubic meters, then environmental authorization will be required by referring to NEMA Section 24G. Now, what exactly is Section 24G of NEMA? Well, this section deals with consequences of unlawful commencement of a listed or specified activity as applicable under the listing notices. This section essentially affords the opportunity to legalize a storage facility that did not obtain an environmental authorization. In other words, an opportunity is provided to apply for a basic EIA. Where listing notice 2 is triggered, environmental authorization will have to be sought by referring to NEMA Section 24G. This will require a full EIA in the form of a scoping and environmental impact report. Now, where listing notice 3 is triggered, and if there is no alternative options, such as relocating to an industrial zone or reducing volume to below 30 cubic meters, then an EIA will be required by referring to NEMA Section 24G. In such an event, the relevant environmental provincial authority should be contacted and invited to a meeting to discuss the situation at hand, as well as plan to rectify the situation going forward in order to obtain environmental authorization by the competent authority. Finally, given what I've said regarding NEMA Section 24G in the context of established dangerous goods storage facilities, it is important to remember that laws have changed over time, and therefore any penalties will be determined based on the regulations that were in place when the business operation legally commenced. Before we move on, it is no secret that some currently rent or aim to rent a commercial storage facility for storing pesticides. For such individuals, keep the following in mind. Firstly, those renting need to determine whether the volume of dangerous goods stored in the facility would require an EIA, taking into consideration the activity as applicable under each listing notice. Where an EIA is deemed necessary, check with the owner that he or she has environmental authorization for the listed or specified activity. Where the owner does not have environmental authorization, and this is deemed necessary after consultations, work with the owner to overcome the issue of compliant facilities located in industrial zones. Secondly, for those planning to rent a storage facility, and if the volume of dangerous goods to be stored triggers an EIA, ensure the owner has environmental authorization for the listed or specified activity under the relevant listing notice. Where this is not the case and the owner is not willing to work on a solution, then consider alternative compliant options, preferably located again in industrial zones. In terms of the way forward regarding NEMA and the EIA regulations, CropLife South Africa has made available the latest version of NEMA on the CropLife South Africa website. CropLife South Africa members are encouraged to access, download, and familiarize themselves with the EIA regulations under this act. Now, where consultants are considered, and this will be the case where EIA assessments are deemed necessary, ensure that they are legit prior to appointing by doing thorough background checks on their experience regarding environmental authorizations. A competent consultant should be familiar with the submission process to obtain authorization from the competent authority for their client. Finally, contrary to what is being communicated by some consultants regarding the storage of dangerous goods in this context, which Gerard and myself have heard about, I want to be clear that the volume referred to by the EIA regulations is the volume or quantity of physical material stored in containers and does not refer to the total storage capacity of the facility, and neither is the volume of dangerous goods stored relative to the floor space when determining whether an EIA will be necessary or not. Alternatively, for anyone who may be unsure or looking for a second opinion, contact myself or Gerard. We have already clarified the EIA regulations in terms of the listing notices with the deaf EIA specialists. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is the EIA regulations in a nutshell and constitutes the first step requiring attention before establishing a commercial pesticide storage facility. But is that all that is required? Just going to have a quick sip of water again. Well, I asked a question in the previous slide, and clearly the answer is no. Like farm pesticide stores, commercial storage facilities also require local authority approval, whether a depot or warehouse. While the procedure is pretty much the same, take note of the following. Any sign-off, certificates, permits required by the local authority will have to be complied with. And it is important to note that this will vary depending on the local government and property in question. Early consultation with the relevant authorities, together with an adequate brief which focuses on the intended use of the premises, danger to be advised. By consulting early, the necessary permits, for example, flammable liquids and trade permits, can be applied for in good time. This avoids the need to apply costly additional measures pertaining to fire safety, for example, once the depot warehouse is ready for occupation. A valid occupancy certificate and necessary permits required by the local authority in question must be renewed as necessary and as required. Continuation of warehouse and depot operations without the prescribed documents is unlawful. Again, for anyone who dialed in a bit later and missed the first part of this webinar, remember that existing commercial pesticide storage facilities, a sketch plan may be submitted to the local authority to schedule an inspection so that an occupancy certificate can be obtained. And note again that this will depend largely on the level of compliance. For a commercial pesticide storage facility that has a valid occupancy certificate, this means that the local authority is happy and considers the storage facility fit for purpose. An occupancy certificate will not be issued if the local authority deems the property unfit for the storage of dangerous goods. Now, are EIAs and local authority approval the only considerations when it comes to commercial pesticide facilities? Well, again, the answer is no. One has to be cognizant of the Hazardous Substances Act, Act number 15 of 1973 as well. For anyone who will be trading in registered formulated pesticides classified as Group 1 Category B, according to this act, it is important to have a Section 4 Group 1 Category B license to do so. Furthermore, on the license application, it is important to list all such products that one intends to trade with. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of how to identify a Group 1 Category B pesticide product, given that Gerard conducted a comprehensive webinar on the subject last year, as well as the fact that we have also since compiled a quick guide document to assist our members, which has been circulated. In short, if the UN number of a pesticide product corresponds with the 6.1 toxic primary or subsidiary risk class, then the product is classified as a Group 1 Category B pesticide under Act 15 of 1973. My advice now would be as follows. Distributors should query with their suppliers, which in most instances will be the registration holders of the products, to identify which products being traded with are Group 1 Category B. Crop advisors, agents can then query this with their suppliers, and in most instances, this will be the distributor they are affiliated with. For any CropLife SA members who require assistance in this regard, please contact Gerard or myself. It is crucial to get this right in order to trade with Group 1 Category B substances. Remember, whoever supplies a Group 1 Category B pesticide can only trade in this way with someone who has a Section 4 license to trade with such products from the facility where such products will be stored. In other words, a supplier cannot sell to a distributor who does not possess a Section 4 license to trade with Group 1 category products. And likewise, this is the same in the case of a distributor and agent. Before issuing this license, which must be renewed annually, health inspectors will be sent to inspect the facility where these identified products, as per the license application, are being stored. This is to ensure that such products are being kept behind lock and key and only sold to legitimate buyers in accordance with the labels. Now, when it comes to keeping Group 1 Category B substances locked behind, keeping Group 1 Category substances behind lock and key, remember that such products can be stored in a separate ventilated lockable room in the building where a separate facility from the building is not required. An area of the depot where such pesticides are stored can be separated with a sealed off drywall that has a lockable door. Another option is to erect a lockable cage, a lockable mesh cage or similar structure around the area where such products are kept. Finally, one last option that I can think up offhand is where a facility is bonded as a Group 1 Category B with a ring bell function to signal to an authorized employee to open the door before anyone enters or leaves the facility, of which will also constitute having such products stored behind lock and key. Finally, maintenance of a poison register is crucial for inspectors to confirm that such products have only been sold to legitimate buyers from that property. Without this register, and where a registration holder, distributor, or agent has been selling such products, such sales are considered unlawful because the inspector will not be able to confirm whether the sales were legitimate, regardless of having a Section 4 license to trade. While the regulations under Act 15 stipulate written records, many provincial health departments are cognizant of the fact that business is no longer conducted in this way and are more than willing to accept electronic records. When an inspector from a particular province requests or insists on written records, perhaps put forward the suggestion of printing out the appropriately signed invoice or delivery note and maintaining it in a file. In my opinion, I believe that such inspectors in this regard must also use their common sense and not be pedantic, where the important thing is that the details of sales for Group 1 category products, as highlighted in the Act, are clearly stipulated on the printed invoice and delivery note. CropLife South Africa members would also know what is required by the provincial health inspectors, given that inspections are conducted prior to the Section 4 license being issued for those members trading in such products. So now, exactly what must be recorded upon such sales? Well, it's simple. Firstly, for registration holders and distributors, it is important to keep the following records maintained: stock records showing name and quantity of such substances, date of importation or acquisition and name of supplier, names of clients using or trading with such substances, names of the responsible person, for example, the branch manager, where such products are supplied to a cooperative or trading company, which is licensed to trade with such products. In addition, the following must be recorded: product name, include the active ingredient here as well, and quantity supplied, date supplied, the number of such an entity's valid Section 4 license to trade with such goods. Remember, these sales and supply records must be kept for 3 years should there be an incident, for example, where a crime is committed using a Group 1 Category B product that of course, warrants an investigation. Secondly, 3-year records of sales of Group 1 Category B hazardous substances must also be kept by licensed retailers, sellers, for example, cooperatives, crop advisors, agents, retail outlets, and so forth, as follows: date of sale, name of active ingredient and quantity, trade name of the product containing the substance, full name and address of the purchaser or recipient, and finally, the purpose for which the substance is purchased. For example, it must be registered for that purpose as per the label. In terms of the construction criteria for a commercial pesticide store at the distributor and agent level, and for those looking to establish such depots, refer again to SANS 10206 Annex E. When it comes to the construction criteria, this is not much different to what I discussed earlier in relation to farm pesticide stores, so I'm not going to repeat myself. With that said, take note of the following. Maintain a record of approved building plan. In terms of the floor has to be designed to withstand the expected weight of stock and shelves, including machinery to be used, such as forklift trucks. The storage area must not be directly connected to a sewer and must be constructed in the form of a retaining basin equipped with a drain valve. No water, even rainwater, is to be pumped unless an analysis of the proposed discharge has shown it to be safe and within permitted limits. The drain valve is to be kept closed during normal operations. The storage area needs to be surrounded by, but not connected to, appropriate storm drains to prevent large quantities of water during severe storms, for example, from entering the storage area. Now, entrance, exit doorways, and openings must be sufficient to enable normal storage operations to be carried out as well. And when considering emergency exits, at least 2 situated as far apart as is possible are provided in addition to the main exits. The number of emergency exit doors to be provided will depend on the size, location, and number of employees working in the depot, where additions in this regard may be stipulated by the relevant local authority, of course, upon inspection. In addition, all emergency exits need to be clearly marked and all escape routes must be indicated by means of the relevant symbolic safety signs. Now, where offices and amenities are not located away from the main body of a depot, but are located within the depot structure, such facilities must be segregated or separated from the storage area with a sealed-off firewall and fitted with self-closing fire doors. In addition, an exit other than via the storage area will need to be provided as well. Okay, in terms of the exit doors, these must open to the outside and have a locking device approved by the local fire authority, be capable of being opened easily from the inside without the use of a key, and must be easy to open in the dark or in dense smoke. In terms of ventilation, when it comes to commercial facilities, this will involve extractor fans in almost all instances. The system needs to be designed and installed so that ventilation of at least 0.5 meters per second is achieved across the storage area. Keep in mind that extractor fans must be firmly attached to the inside of the wall, and bottom extractor fans need to be positioned at least 100 millimeters above the level of the bund and on opposite walls to ensure cross ventilation. Adequate washing facilities are also to be provided. In particular, when it comes to personal decontamination, a wash basin with running water accompanied with soap and clean towel, eye wash bottle, and safety shower facility need to be made available in the depot in case of accidental exposure of an operator to a pesticide. Finally, battery charging facilities for electrically operated forklift trucks should preferably be in an open-sided covered area within the marshalling area. Let's move on and focus on management at the commercial depot level, whether owned by a distributor or agent. Firstly, I must reiterate the importance of security, where access must be prohibited at all times with an appropriate entry pass system, and all entry doors must remain locked outside working hours. The names and contact numbers of persons to be called in an emergency must be given to security personnel where applicable, local police, and the local fire authority. Ensure there is a system in place so that whoever may be called has access to keys of the depot, and that these keys are also clearly labeled to avoid confusion. Secondly, when it comes to receipt and dispatch, take note of the following. There needs to be at least one person trained in all aspects related to the loading and unloading of regulated pesticide consignments, who is present while loading or unloading is in progress. The person trained to oversee such activities must be nominated in writing by the depot manager, and where there is no depot manager, this must be done by the business owner. Once nominated in writing, this person will be known as the qualified person. The qualified person will be required to understand how to correctly classify pesticides, supervise loading, offloading, determine whether the pesticide consignment is regulated or not, and to know the specifications for dangerous goods placards in relation to vehicle type and load. Now, for anyone who attended my webinar last year pertaining to the safe and legal transportation of pesticides by road, where this was covered in detail, will know that the information I have just communicated applies to trailers as well. The qualified person must have access to SANS 10231 in order to access tables E1, the load compatibility chart, and table C1, the exempt quantity list. I also urge CropLife SA members to take advantage of the CropLife SA guideline document titled The Safe and Legal Transportation of Pesticides by Road Self-Governance, which comprises of checklists pertaining to the consignor and consignee that have relevance here. The qualified person must ensure that all goods received are checked against the relevant invoice, delivery note, or dangerous goods declaration. No pesticides must be storage for the pesticides have not been provided by the driver of the delivery vehicle. Finally, there is to be no uncontrolled or indiscriminate simultaneous loading and unloading of more than one vehicle or trailer at a time. I'm just going to have a quick sip of water again, everyone. Okay, now thirdly, the responsibilities of the depot manager or business owner in the absence of a manager. The depot manager or business owner must ensure the following. All safety, operating, and emergency procedures are adhered to. The safety data sheets of the pesticide stores are readily available at a central location for reference to the actions that need to be taken in the event of an incident. Stock records are kept up to date and are readily available. Hazard and risk areas are clearly marked. Operators, which include forklift operators and so forth, are trained in all operations and in particular the safe handling of pesticides. And this also includes what I covered under farm stores with regard to the new GHS label, formats. Now, further, operators need to be trained in the use of fire extinguishers on site, where all training records for each operator is also safely filed. It's no use having operators in an area where there's a fire and they have no clue how to use the fire equipment. That just doesn't make sense. So please keep that in mind, everyone. Also, all operators handling pesticides in the depot are provided with the appropriate PPE where a register is maintained. And I keep talking about a register because this serves as proof for the employer to say that he has complied with this mandate as stipulated under the Occupational Health and Safety Acts when it comes to safety, employee, and well-being. Now, the manager here must also make available in his or her office a hardcover incident record book for recording all safety risks, fire, spillage, accident, unauthorized access, and personal exposure or personal injury incidents. And it is highly recommended that he or she has access to the most recent version of SANS 10206. Now, when it comes to record keeping, the following is very important to take note of. Written or electronic records must be kept for each product received and dispatched. It is recommended that on receipt of a pesticide from a supplier, at least the following information be recorded: product name, batch number, name and address of supplier, quantity and date of receipt, as well as the name of the qualified person who received the product. Keep records of all products distributed, sold, and the balance of products remaining in the depot. This, for me, is also just good business practice. Critically important is the maintenance of a poison register for all Group 1 category pesticides sold from the business address as stipulated on the Section 4 license application. Again, to reiterate, signed records here must be kept for 3 years and made available to inspectors as requested. It is advisable to separate sales records for all Group 1 category pesticides from the rest, which will make the inspector's job a lot easier since most will not be willing to look through all sales records. Okay, when it comes to separation and segregation, while I note at the commercial level that this should be based on detailed knowledge of the properties and the hazards associated with the pesticides that are stored, it is not different to what I covered for farm pesticide stores. In addition, this is the same for a flammable store operation working area, warning notices, symbolic safety and directional signs, product labels, fire protection, spill management, first aid, emergency planning, as well as the procedure for high-risk activities such as welding within the depot. In terms of waste management, and I'm going to focus on obsolete pesticide stocks and contaminated plastic, cardboard, and paper packaging. These will have to be thermally destroyed by a suitable and compliant hazmat service waste provider. It is important to safeguard any obsolete pesticide stocks as well as contaminated packaging. For this purpose, there is a guideline available on the container management page via the CropLife SA website titled Guidelines for the Disposal of Obsolete Pesticides and Contaminated Packaging. Now, where obsolete pesticides and contaminated packaging is safeguarded, and if the hazmat company has to safeguard before transporting for thermal destruction, then expect much higher costs. Finally, and to reiterate again, the following actions are not allowed in a commercial pesticide depot: repacking or refilling, vehicle maintenance, overnight garaging of any vehicles or motorized equipment, including forklift trucks, and finally, smoking, the consumption of food and drink, as well as exercising is not allowed in the depot. Okay, so now it remains important that business owners or potential business owners of pesticide depots utilize SANS 10206 by referring to Annex E in order to compile comprehensive guideline checklists adapted to business operations in order to ensure compliance. For CropLife SA members, this job has been made easier where the association has already compiled a comprehensive guideline checklist which summarizes the many pieces of existing legislation impacts the storage of agricultural remedies at the distributor and agent levels. CropLife SA members, where applicable, are encouraged to utilize this important resource and adapt it to business operations. Going forward, the stewardship portfolio will look to further refine this current guideline checklist version to make it a lot more direct. While inspectors may not look at every detail when it comes to compliance in this regard, rest assured that insurance companies will, in the event of a fire, major spill, or disaster. The reason for this should really be no secret to anyone. Now, as with farm pesticide stores, it's important to understand what's in place, what's not, and where attention may be required. A concerted effort to address short-term tactical targets will serve distributors and agents well in the long term, as well as during inspections where a compliance item may still be lacking somewhat. Responsibility among current employees look higher, and where neither is possible, the responsibility will sit with the business owner. A concerted effort should be made to work with the local authority, in particular the local fire authority, to again ensure safety, compliance, and growth. Right. Now that we have covered commercial pesticide depots at the distributor and agent level, let's take a close look at the warehousing of pesticides with suppliers of pesticides, and by this I mean the registration holders of pesticide products in South Africa. However, with that said, distributors with large facilities where storage of pesticides is in excess of quantities given in Table E1 of SANS 10206, according to class division, will also fall under this section. CropLife South Africa members are to take note that on sheet 2 of the distributor agent depot compliance checklist, a summarized version of Table E1 is provided. Again, I'm not going to cover every detail here, given that a lot of information has already been covered under the previous two sections, of which is relevant in this context, although at a much larger scale, of course. So I'm just going to touch on key points. Let's jump straight into it. Okay, now given the sort of commercial pesticide warehousing operations, environmental authorization becomes mandatory. Whether basic or full EIA is required, this will depend on the volume of pesticides with UN numbers to be stored in containers. As I covered in detail earlier, for existing pesticide warehouses, Section 24G of NEMA becomes relevant. For pesticide warehouses that have been issued a valid occupancy certificate by the local authority and have obtained environmental authorization to operate, there should be no major concerns. To be honest, anyone operating with such a facility will be undergoing regular inspections in the country. What I will say here, it is always best to do more when it comes to compliance rather than the bare minimum. Aspects identified by inspectors requiring attention must be taken seriously and complied with. Now, for those looking to construct a pesticide warehouse, the procedure to be followed for local authority approval to have an occupancy certificate issued is the same as that covered in the previous sections. Importantly, what I want to focus on here is the Section 4 license to trade with Group 1 Category A or B substances as per Act 15 of 1973. While I covered Group 1 Category B pesticides in detail earlier, I did not cover Group 1 Category A substances, which have relevance when it comes to registration holders. Any registration holder trading in technical grade materials such as aluminium phosphide, antimony potassium sodium tartrate, or zinc phosphide must have a Section 4 Group 1 Category A license issued by the Department of Health to do so. For those who may be confused, remember technical grade material is used to formulate the end products by manufacturers and formulators. Like with Group 1 Category B substances, storage requirements and the maintenance of a poison register, as covered earlier, are necessary. Now, it is also important for me to reiterate that registration holders licensed to trade with Group 1 Category B products must not trade with distributors or agents, retailers that are not licensed to trade with Group 1 Category B products. It must be clear to distributors that under no circumstances may such products be sold by any affiliated agent without a valid license. Large-scale distributors also need to be clear with their crop advisors agents that there is to be no intertrading with anyone who does not possess a valid Section 4 license when it comes to such products. Because if in the event of an inspection and if this is not in order, the situation can get very ugly. So please, everyone, let's keep this in order. Okay, so moving on. Finally, take note of the following points regarding pesticide warehouses. For spillage containment, bunding is not the only option. A sum capacity of 10% of the total storage volume can be constructed as an alternative to a curb, sill, or bund wall. However, keep in mind that the sump will need to be provided with pneumatically controlled valves that remain in a closed position for large installations. Further, an analysis of the sump water must be conducted prior to it being released as a precautionary measure to control contamination of water sources. Now, when it comes to the exit doors here, and unlike farm stores or depots where wood can be considered, these must be made of steel. For ventilation in pesticide warehouses, ensure 5 changes of air per hour with the mechanical ventilation system. Also maintain a clear space of 1 meter between the top of products and the roof, as well as between the products and the wall. It is also clearly stipulated that there needs to be separate loading and unloading bays. Now, when it comes to forklift trucks, it is clearly stipulated that these must be powered by petrol or liquid petroleum, that these must not be powered by petrol or liquid petroleum gas, commonly known as LPG engines. In addition, a carbon dioxide or dry chemical type fire extinguisher needs to also be fitted on each truck. It is also critical to ensure dedicated pathways for pedestrians and forklift trucks to avoid an incident, or have a protocol in place that ensures forklift trucks have right of way. Large distribution storage facilities also need to take cognizance of this. Okay, the responsibilities of the warehouse controller is no different to that of a commercial depot manager. And note that the information I communicated earlier under the section regarding record keeping is also very relevant here. It is also important to note that a compliant overhead automated sprinkler system for warehouses with a stacking height of more than 6 meters will be required. Keep in mind that the premises will likely need to be equipped with a suitable fire detection and internally audible alarm system as required by the local fire authority and based on the risk profile of the warehouse. In terms of the construction criteria, when it comes to racks, shelving, flammable store, management, which includes security, receipt and dispatch, separation and segregation, warning notices, symbolic and safety directional signs, fire protection, spill management, waste management, and not forgetting emergency planning. The information is not different to what I communicated under the previous sections. For an in-depth look into the various compliance requirements and recommendations for pesticide warehouses, particularly when it comes to safety, CropLife SA members are encouraged, where applicable, to take advantage of the guideline CropLife SA Pesticide Warehouse Compliance Checklist. For anyone who is not a CropLife SA member, refer to SANS 10206 Annex G. As I noted in the previous section, a concerted effort should be made to work with the local authority, in particular the local fire authority, to ensure safety, compliance, and growth. Having a clear, concise disaster management plan in place cannot be overstated. This will prove useful in such unfortunate events, particularly those resulting from crime. Okay, so everyone, no matter the scale, when it comes to commercial pesticide storage facilities, remember that money spent on compliance will pale in comparison to what will have to be spent in the event of a disaster. CropLife SA members who rent warehouses or depots for the storage of pesticides are encouraged to share the relevant checklists with the owners. Likewise, members who utilize the services of a third-party logistics company are also encouraged to share the checklist as applicable with the relevant company personnel. For any CropLife SA member needing assistance or advice with compliance when it comes to the warehouse, do not hesitate to contact Gerald or myself. Finally, whether pesticides are stored on farms or in commercial facilities, let us all act as proud South African citizens and practice responsible pesticide storage, not just because it's a legal obligation, but because it's the right thing to do. Now, before I close, there may be someone from the public who has dialed in today that may be interested in the best storage practices for home and garden pesticides. This is very important because when one talks pesticide storage, often such consumers are forgotten about. Okay, first and foremost, homeowners must always consult the product label and safety data sheet for specific storage information. Importantly, store pesticides out of reach of children and pets. Keep pesticides tightly closed in a locked cabinet in a well-ventilated utility area or garden shed, as you see on your screens. Never store pesticides in cabinets with or near food, animal feed, clothing, medical supplies, or other household items. Homeowners must be aware that pesticide fumes can be absorbed by food and animal feeds. This can have serious negative health consequences for animals and everyone in the household. Storing pesticides with toys, clothes, and other household items is an absolute no. This, to me, comes down to common sense. Why would a homeowner want to store a pesticide with toys? That's obviously asking for trouble. Now, when it comes to flammable substances such as fuels, gases, these must not be stored in the same area as pesticides. In the unfortunate event of a fire, fuel and flammable gases will further intensify the fire. Homeowners must also not store pesticides in places where flooding is possible or where pesticides might spill or leak into wells, drains, groundwater, or surface water. Furthermore, homeowners must with solid pesticide formulations separately. Herbicides, again, must always be stored at the top, at the bottom, and not above insecticides and fungicides. If herbicides are on top and spill into insecticides or fungicides, damage to crops being grown in the garden is guaranteed, as I mentioned at the start of this webinar as well. Now, very important, homeowners must always store pesticides in their original containers with the original label, which lists directions for use, ingredients, and first aid in case of accidental poisoning or exposure. To be clear, never transfer pesticides to soft drink bottles or other containers. Why? Because children may mistake them for some lack to eat or drink. I strongly advise that homeowners educate all caregivers about the potential dangers of pesticides and share these tips with them. Teach children that pesticides are poisons and are not to be touched. Protect pets and children by carefully following the label directions and precautions. Post the Poison Information Center emergency number as indicated on the product near every telephone in the home and save it on the cell phone as well. Homeowners must always purchase the amount of pesticide required for a particular pest problem. Pesticides must not be allowed to build up in the home. Where possible, keep a register so that the older products are always used before the newer products. Again, this is to avoid pesticides expiring before use, thereby becoming obsolete. And with that said, everyone, it now brings to a close this webinar session. I do apologize about the glitch earlier on. Yeah, it was quite stressful at the start, but yeah, I think we did manage to get through it in good time. And I see that it's not 3 o'clock yet, so yeah, we're well within schedule. I do trust all of you enjoyed it and also learned something. And everyone, thank you all for being firstly patient at the start with me. Again, sincere apologies for that. And also for being part of this webinar. And for those of you who may have further questions or would like to chat further around this topic, please feel free to contact me via cell or email. I'm always available to chat. All the very best to everyone that will be doing the assessment. Again, as a reminder, the assessment is loaded in category 3 of the CPD system for CropLife South Africa members registered on the CPD system. And again, if you listened and concentrated during this training session, 100% should be the order of the day. Have a great weekend and be safe. Cheers, everybody.